Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast, where we help leaders build strong teams. Teams built on empathy, understanding, and trust, where every team member feels valued and contributes at the highest level possible.
Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast. My name is Steve Neesmith.
And I'm Rodney Cox.
And Rodney, our guest today, is author and speaker Trudy Cathy White. Trudy is the youngest child and only daughter of Chick-fil-A founders Truett and Jeannette Cathy. At just 19 years old, Trudy opened Birmingham, Alabama's second Chick-fil-A restaurant, making her one of the youngest operators in Chick-fil-A's history. And for 20 years, Trudy and her husband, John, served in missions through the International Mission Board. And upon completing their work with the IMB, Trudy served for 13 years as the director of WinShape Camp for girls and co-founded Lifeshape and the Impact 360 Institute. Today, Trudy serves as a Chick-fil-A Ambassador and has become nationally known as an influential leader and speaker. She's also the author of several books, including Along the Way, Climb Every Mountain, A Quiet Strength, and the book we'll chat about a little bit today, A Legacy That Lasts, Preserving and Transferring Your Family Values. Trudy, thank you for joining us today on the StrongTeams.com podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you for sure.
You know, Trudy, I'm going to introduce you a little different way this morning. I'm going to introduce you to our guest and our listeners through a little backstory. And so there was a young man, his name was Brad McDonald, and Brad McDonald went through the Impact 360 Institute when he was 18 years old. He went off to college. And he came back and he worked on staff for 4 years at Impact 360 Institute. And he met his wife there that was over the residence department. Her name was Becca. And he and our path crossed while he was on staff. I was speaking on a common stage with another individual, and he happened to be in the audience. And he came and he said, listen, I really want to introduce you to my boss, John Basie, and a man named Dr. Alsop. And so we had a little conference call, and after that conference call, Dr. Alsop invited me to come do an all-staff team building for you guys down in Pine Mountain, Georgia. And I did that event in early 2017, and you guys were building a fantastic facility down in Pine Mountain, the Impact 360 Institute facility that you now house your program in down there. And was invited to the dedication where you and John, along with a lot of other of the team, spoke on some amazing research that y'all had commissioned around Gen Z. And that August the 5th, 2017, along with the other three men that were there with me, really had an impact on us. And it really changed the way in which we saw things and how we looked at Gen Z. And I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you and John and your family for all that you do in order to encourage and equip the leaders of tomorrow to lead with a biblical worldview. What you guys are doing is just amazing. And I want to applaud you for that.
Well, thank you so much for that kind story and the opportunity to have. It's really our pleasure to be able to invest in this next generation, and the influence that we're able to leverage through it is just, it's amazing what God will do with ordinary people, right? So
Absolutely.
Excited that's been challenging to you as well.
Yeah, and Brad and Becca now have two children. Yeah. You know, they live in Phoenix, Arizona. He's still involved in the Chick-fil-A program, and just an amazing young man and leading well in his community, really having an impact, and just an amazing young man.
Yeah, outstanding couple.
You know, Trudy, today we really want our listeners to get to know you a whole lot better and a lot more intimately, and we want to talk about your book, A Legacy That Lasts. So first, could you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and your family, your husband, John, your kids, and your grandkids?
Sure. As you heard in the introduction, John and I met through Chick-fil-A. I was just 19 years old serving as a Chick-fil-A operator. John came in and applied for a job with me as a team member. So I hired him. I quickly realized I was his boss. I was making out his hours. And the more I worked around him, the more I realized I was falling in love with him. So I decided he didn't need to be free on Friday nights to go out with girls. He actually needed to be in Chick-fil-A working with me. And that is really how our relationship started. The Lord used Chick-fil-A to put us together. We've been married for a little over 45 years now. We have raised 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. They're all married. And we have 17 grandchildren. Amazing group. When we get them all together, we absolutely love being able to pour into our family members and feel so blessed in the children and grandchildren that God has given us, for sure.
I can't even imagine what Thanksgiving looks like. I mean, how do you
Yeah.
how do you put that many people around a table?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but we managed to do it, and it's a lot of fun. We even take a few vacations together with all of us, and I tell people a lot of times that we got a little jealous. We missed our time with just our adult children, so we created some special experiences that I'm sure we'll get into in this interview to be able to kind of hone in on those relationships and be able to have a little bit more conversational time, because when we're all together, yeah, it's crazy, but it's a good crazy. And I was with a lady one year, many years ago, in Camp Life, that she was visiting with me on the campus, and we were eating in the cafeteria where all the campers were, 200 plus little girls, all chattering during lunchtime. And I apologized to the lady. I said, "I'm sorry, it's so loud in here." And she said, "Oh," says, "it's good noise, so don't worry about it." So when we're all together as a family, it's good noise.
That's great. Trudy, we heard in our opening that you've done, your background is just so incredibly interesting, from your professional journey to your personal journey, including everything from operating a restaurant to director of WinShape Camps and spending 20 years on the mission field. It sounds like you're quite the adventurer. So we'd love for you to tell our listeners a little bit more about that journey, and, what are some of the new things that you've learned along the way by venturing out and doing new things, not just staying in one lane?
Sure. Well, one of the things I think I've learned in this journey is the fact that, God uses not just our own giftedness, our abilities and talents that we feel we're good at, but He often asks us to step outside of our comfort zone and do some things that we don't quite feel equipped to be able to do. And for me personally, that journey has been able to learn how to really depend on the Lord. I think of several examples, one of which would be when we went to Brazil as missionaries. We had to learn to speak the language of Portuguese, a very difficult language. Any language is hard to learn, I think, a second language as an adult. And for me particularly, I found it to be extremely hard. I remember one particular day I'd come home from class, and I had just had just a tough day. And I was crying out to the Lord, literally crying to the Lord and saying, "Lord, I need you to know something. I can't do this. I can't learn this language." And it was in that very discouraging moment and season in my life that I just paused for a minute. And although I didn't hear an audible voice, I did hear the Lord say within me and said, "Trudy," says, "you're right where I want you to be. I want you to recognize that you can't do some things. I want you to depend on me to do them through you." And that was a real turning point in my spiritual walk with the Lord, to learn to be able to have a sense of boldness and courageousness to do some things, to step out and do some things that are quite unique. Being a director for summer camp was not a job that was prepared for, not anything that I had was seeking, but it was a situation where at WinShape Camps, the camps that my mom and dad started back in the mid 80s, we were without a director at the time, and the family came to me and said, "Trudy, you used to go to camp as a little girl. Maybe you could come and be the camp director." Little different responsibilities for sure. But it was in that moment that I also reached out to the Lord, and I realized that God will take ordinary people and do extraordinary things. And I told God, I said, "God, if you'll take my mind and help it be focused on you, if you'll take my heart and allow me to serve these little girls and use my hands in acts of love, I will step into this role, but be very dependent on you." So my life verse has come from Luke 1:37 that says, "For with God all things are possible." So in this journey of adventure, as you call it, even becoming a parent or even a grandparent, none of those children came with a instruction manual. So we weren't sure how to be parents. We are discovering how to be grandparents that are really investing in the next generation. And through all of that, God has taught me that with Him, all things are possible for sure.
One of the common threads between all of the interviews that we do with these great leaders over the last 6 months to a year is this is just humility, like the ability to humble yourself enough to say, I don't have everything and I need you, God, and I need others. I need other people that have things that are different than me, and I need to invite them into the things that I don't have. And when I humble myself enough to do that, then your grace is not only sufficient, but I have more. I have more. As you do your work and as I do my work, we collectively glorify God in what we do. And it's the thesis, it's the ethos of everything that we teach around the Leading from Your Strengths principles. Really, really important. I'd love to hear your humility coming out kind of in spades and so early in our interview.
Yeah, most definitely. I think who we gather around us is important. I was just thinking, we need cheerleaders we need truth speakers, people that will really tell us truth and tell us where our weaknesses are. We just need to surround ourselves with other people that can help us. I learned a lot of that from my mom and dad. So thanks for bringing that out to the listeners. I think that's very important.
Trudy, in the book that you just wrote, A Legacy That Lasts, I think it'd be great if you could kind of give just an overarching summary to our listeners. What inspired you to write this book and, A Legacy That Lasts?
Yeah, well, I came out of a really dark time in our life. It was the time when we lost both my mom and dad. My dad passed away at the age of 93 in 2014. And just 10 months later, my mother passed away at the age of 92 in 2015. So when we lose them both, a mom and dad like that, so close together, I'm the youngest in the family, the only daughter, and lived very close to where my mom and dad had lived in their home for 56 years, I believe. And so I was kind of the one that was designated to go over and kind of clean through the house. And for anybody that's walked through that, having lost both parents and opening all the cabinets and all the drawers and sorting through all their things, it was a bit of a challenge for me. I found days that it was very difficult. I just had to lock up the house and leave because I got so emotional. There were other times I would chuckle and laugh at some of the things that I would find. Now, when you live in a house for 56 years, that's a long time. You gather a lot of stuff. And of course, they didn't take any of that with them. So I had everything to have to go through. But after cleaning through their house completely, I realized that the most valuable thing that my mom and dad left me was their legacy. It's actually the life that they had lived. And we often refer to leaving a legacy, but what I like to challenge my readers through this book is to recognize that the legacy you leave then is actually the life you're living right now. And that's really where the inspiration came to write this book, is how to challenge people to recognize the fact that it's important that you recognize you're living your legacy now and that you're making choices about how you're living that legacy. And so my book talks a little bit about, one, how to identify values in your life, the things that matter most to you, and then how do you go about preserving those, and then how do you preserve them in such a way that you're successful in transferring that to the next generation. So it's a challenging book for anybody, but particularly those who are raising children or even wanting to invest in this next generation as well.
I love that story behind the book, and I think it's great that the book titled A Legacy That Lasts really is part of the legacy that you will be leaving the next generation and your family, future generations and your family. So what a sweet gift for them as well. Speaking of the next generation, Trudy, you and your family have a well-known history of building up young people, the next generation. That appears to be an overarching value of your family. Where did that passion come from?
That's a great question. I look back on my mother and dad's life and realized the fact that my dad's father was not really in the picture much as a young boy when he was growing up. My mother's earthly father walked away when she was a baby in arms, so she never really knew him. And I think there was something from early on in the marriage of my mom and dad that caused them to want to invest in young people, to be able to help them, particularly those who had come from challenging situations in their homes. So early on, my mom and dad began to teach teenage boys and girls. My dad taught the boys, 12 and 13-year-olds. for almost 50 years in his local church. My mom taught 12 and 13-year-old girls for not quite that long, but for about 30 years. So they spent a lot of time investing in young people. I think they were taking the skills they were learning at home and then trying to apply them not only to their children, but to their young people that were in their Sunday school class in their church. But then, of course, Chick-fil-A began to grow, and we hired team members that were the next generation, the young people. And my dad always wanted to inspire these team members to do what they do with excellence. And so there was this drive and passion in his heart to invest really well in good Chick-fil-A operators who would spend their time investing in these team members. And another component of this was my mom and dad starting WinShape Foundation, which was in 1984 that they launched this foundation in order to invest in young people. And one of the first programs they launched was WinShape Camps. In 1985, a camp for boys, and then 1987, a camp for girls. So I've kind of grown up in that environment with parents who cared about relating to and investing their time and influence with the next generation. And it's just kind of trickled down to us as well. John and I are very passionate about how to help this next generation in a lot of ways, because we feel like that, we're not living this life just for ourselves, but we're living a life to be able to invest in the next generation to help them to be very successful in what they do. I remember one of the things that my mom and dad drove home so much to the three of us as children. I have two brothers, but they also drove it home to young people that they were with, were what my dad referred to as the 3 M's. He often referred to the fact that young people get discouraged sometimes because they say mom and dad make all the decisions for them. Mom and dad tell them when they have to go to bed. Mom and dad tell them what time they have to come back home. And they would kind of, like typical teenagers, we would do the same thing, kind of complain that our parents were always telling us what to do. And they can't wait till I grow up and I can make my own decisions. And my mom and dad would say, what you need to understand is the most important decisions you are going to get to make. And they all begin with the letter M. The first decision you get to make is who your master will be for life. And you want to make sure you get that choice right. The second M is the word mission, that you get to determine what your mission will be for life. Your parents won't determine that for you. And the last M would be your mate. You choose who your mate is going to be for life. And so my parents would tell us and tell young people that, listen, if you can get those 3 right, those are the most important decisions you'll ever make. And I appreciate the fact that my parents model for me what it means to look out for the next generation. And John and I thoroughly enjoy the investment in this next generation as well.
I was just so fascinated, Trudy, by what you were saying there around the 3 M's. It really absolutely distracted me.
I love that.
No, the 3 M. I have grandbabies. I have 3 grandbabies. My oldest is turning 8 soon, and those 3 M's will be part of my vocabulary from this day forward. And I want to thank you for that. And I think those are the types of things, Trudy, that you and your family have stewarded so well. It's like we hear these things that are so simple as the 3 M's, but they're so transformational because they're so full of truth. Who will be your master? What will be your mission in life? Because you were placed here for mission. You weren't placed here to consume. You were placed here for a mission, right? And who will your mate be? Who will be your suitable helper? And those 3 things, getting them right, I want to transfer that to my grandchildren. And I want to thank you for sharing that with our listeners today. I want you to thank you for sharing that with me. And so I wanted just to stop and pause and to tell you that. Thank you.
Trudy, you've said and written that every family has values, whether they can articulate it or not. Can you unpack this for our listeners? How important is it to recognize your family's values?
Well, this is the way I approach this thought. I think about the fact that we're all given 24 hours in a day, and we all get to choose how we're going to use the time that God has given us. So the values that we have in our life are really the things that drive our decision-making process. Mm-hmm. Now, we do all have values, but we do have to identify those. I remember one of my values, let me just say, is family. So if you look at my calendar, you'll see where I have blocked out specific time to be able to be with family. But I wrote in my book about this story that happened to me. John was out of town traveling. I was at home. And sometimes when he goes out of town, it's my chance to get caught up on a lot of things. I know I don't have to prepare dinner for him. I have the whole evening to myself, and it's just get it done, Trudy, kind of mode that I'm in. And I randomly receive a call from my daughter who says, Michael's birthday, which is our grandson, is coming up in a couple of days, but we decided to take him out to dinner tonight and just wanted to know if he wanted to come along to help us celebrate. Well, my first thought was, I don't have time to go have dinner with him. I'm going to get a lot done this evening while John's out of town. And then my second thought was, family is a value to me. It's really important that I invest my time when I can with them. And so I told her, sure, I'll be there for dinner to celebrate Michael and his birthday. And I went, and I wrote in my book that I'm not sure Michael will ever remember that Mimi was actually there at his dinner, but maybe he will have a memory of the family just enjoying time together. I know he won't remember the gift that I took him, but I think he might remember the time that we spent there together. And so that's where I say that whatever is important to us in our lives, that's where we choose to invest our time. And so there are three questions that I challenge our children, our grandchildren now, and friends that I'm with to ask themselves to help them to be able to identify their values. The first question is, what really matters to me? What's really important to me in my life? That's the first question. The second question is, what values govern my decision-making process? So you've got to realize that there are values, and those are the things that are driving you to choose whether you're going to say yes to something or no to something. And let me tell you, there are a lot of great things that we can say yes to, but sometimes we have to say no to the good things so that we can say yes to the even better things. It's important that we understand our values from that perspective. And the third question is this question of, what values do I want others to notice in my life? Because what I found is sometimes we can say something is important to us. Maybe use the same example of family. Maybe someone says, family's really important to me. I value my family. But other people watch that person's life and they think, I hardly ever see you spend time with your family. You hardly ever even talk about your family. So there's a bit of a disconnect maybe between what someone thinks is valuable, is of value to them, and what others see. And so I think it's important that if you say these things really matter to you, people actually notice. They actually do.
The ability to govern your decisions through the values in which you possess is not only critical, but without those, there's really no compass. And you talk as well in your book about gaining that same clarity on your identity. If you don't know your identity, it's impossible for you to actually transfer your values. And you focus on three questions there. And I think those questions are, who am I? Why am I here? And what should I be about? What should I be doing? And so tell us a little bit more about those three questions and unpack those a little bit for our listeners.
Yeah, I think they're so important. It is the very first chapter in this book that we begin to talk about this question. And these are the three most important questions that young people today are asking of themselves. And I believe as adults, we are asking ourselves as well. And it is this first question of, who am I? Which really relates to our identity. Now, for myself, I often realize that my identity is not wrapped up in who I am. It's not wrapped up in who I'm related to. It's not wrapped up in what I'm able to accomplish. But I have to go to God's word to find the truth of what my identity is, what does God say about me? God says we were fearfully and wonderfully made, that we were made for a purpose in life, and that God says that you are mine. I have claimed you as mine. God created me. He knew me when I was formed in my mother's womb. He knew me before I was born. So my identity is all wrapped up in who God says that I am. It's really important that our young people get that answer right, that they understand who they are. The second question is, why am I here? It's that question of purpose. Do I have a real purpose in life? And of course, in the book of Jeremiah, oftentimes we hear it quoted, the verse that says, I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord, plans that will prosper you, plans to give you a hope, plans to give you a future. And who doesn't need to hear that, to recognize the fact that we have been born for a purpose? Even in our family business of Chick-fil-A, people often think we're in chicken business. We remind them we're actually in the people business, and that we actually have a purpose for being in business. Our purpose, even at Chick-fil-A, is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. So that's our purpose. You don't hear us talking about how many chicken sandwiches we want to sell, how much money we want to make, how big we want to be. That has nothing to do with our family business, but it has everything to do with glorifying God by stewarding what He's given us and to have a positive influence. So purpose, you can see, just gives you so much more clarity in your priorities and what your values are. And the third question is, it's more of a where do I belong question. It's that idea of acceptance. Um, Everybody has the need to love and to be loved. And it begins in God's word, in the most familiar verse there is in John 3:16 that says, for God so loved the world. So that includes all of us. So anyone who is hungry for love needs to recognize that God loves every person around the world. So God so loved the world that He sent His Son Jesus to die on the cross, that whoever, and that includes me, whoever believes can receive the gift of eternal life. And so it's just important to realize that we are completely accepted before the Lord, and we have community with Him. We can have a personal relationship. It begins there, and then it grows from there to be able to surround ourselves with other believers who can be encouragers in our life.
I think about Ephesians 2:10 when you speak about purpose and about these three questions, and that you're God's handiwork. He has crafted you to do good work that He's prepared in advance for you to do, and He's inviting us to walk in it. And I've done a lot of word study around that word handiwork or craftsmanship or workmanship. And if you distill that down to its simplest term, it literally means you're God's poem to the world. And if you stop and think about that a minute, you're God's poem to the world. Every time someone encounters you, do they encounter God's poem to the world, His sweet aroma to the world? And it's a fascinating thought. And the role in which the believer plays in shaping the culture around us, I think in many ways we've lost sight. And it's a lot of the reason why our world is kind of where it is today. And we need to start not only understanding our identity in Christ, understanding our values, but start transferring those to everyone in which we encounter. So I love the thesis of the book, especially to our family. And, but the ethos of transferring those to every person you encounter is so powerful.
Well, what I began to realize as I was writing this book and looking back on our past and being parents, raising children, realizing that so many times we give things to our children, and there's a great joy in being able to give gifts to others for sure. But we look back and we say, oh my goodness, our children, either they outgrow the things that we give them, they break the things that we give them, they lose the things that we give them. Things are really not the key that leverages your opportunity into the future. But what really does is our experiences. The experiences that we create that allow children, friends, people around you to latch on to a memory that will last a lifetime. So we begin to think about this idea of how do you create value experiences that will create value as you go along in the future. I try to think of a few that John and I have implemented with our own grandchildren. We do something in the summertime called Camp Meepaw. Now, John's Papa, I'm Mimi, and so Camp Meepaw is the name of our summer camp, and we created it for our grandchildren. And they all come together, and they know they're going to spend, it's 3 nights and 4 days with us, just John and myself and all these grandchildren. And because of my background of going to summer camps and being a camp director, I kind of put my director hat on, and we have created all kinds of experiences for our grandchildren to share while we're together. I mean, we do simple things. We do things like crafts together. We have a pool, so they get to have pool time. We do devotional time together. We let them help prepare meals as we serve meals together and all sit down and eat them together. We go out to the pond and we go fishing together. We do field games like kickball out in the front yard, things that we are creating. And we are creating some incredible memories for our grandchildren to enjoy for the years. We would much rather create those kind of value experiences versus giving them a gift. Of course, we'll do that for their birthdays, but we love creating experiences that add value to their life. We've even done this with our adult children. Now, I think we mentioned earlier in this interview that when our whole family's together, sometimes the family leaves and I think, did we ever finish any conversation we actually started while we were together? And so John and I would get a little jealous about our time just with our grown children. And we thought, what if we carved out a weekend once a year and spent it with our adult children and their spouses together? No grandchildren allowed, sort of, so to speak. And so we have done this now for 19 consecutive years. We have carved out time just to be with our grown children and their spouses. And it's a very intentional weekend together. It's a quick weekend, but we spend time together, focusing on personal development, professional development, simply because we're in a family business that we're all trying to run together. And we spend time praying for one another. We talk about our marriages, where are our challenges, how can we come alongside and help one another in that. We talk about parenting skills that we're meeting, and it is an incredible time that we spend together. We call it our family assembly, and we wouldn't take anything for that. It has bonded our relationship with our children, even though they have their own interests, their own personalities. Every child is different, as you know, that's raised in a home. But those kind of experiences planned together are what are adding so much rich value to our family and ultimately, of course, to our legacy.
Trudy, I love those examples. We really hope on this podcast to give our listeners, how should I say it, tactical, practical advice on how to improve the situation that they're in. And the Camp Meepaw and the family assembly, I think, are great examples that I know I'm going to take with me and that our listeners will take with them. So thank you for that response. What advice would you give to someone out there that says, my kids are grown now, or I'm already a grandparent? It feels like it's too late for me to transfer values.
Yeah, I would say it's never too late. That's always my my thought in any situation, to be honest with you. When we had this idea of challenging our children, our adult children, really with these questions about what matters to you, what values are governing your decision-making process, we started presenting these questions to our children. And we went through some exercises with them to help them sort through their own values. And we challenged them. We want you to take this list of 100 words and we want you to get it down to about 5 or 6 words. And we want you to hone in on those for the years ahead to make sure that you're focusing on what matters to you. And I put this exercise in my book, these little cards that you can cut out and you can do this exercise. So we did it with our adult children. And then our children turned to us and they said, well, Mom and Dad, what are your values? And we said, well, we probably need to think about that a little bit. And John and I kind of began to, we had to take our 30 plus years at that time of marriage and look back over our shoulder at the experiences, things that God had allowed us to be able to be exposed to and to be able to do and recognize what our passions and our giftedness and our strengths were. And from that, we identified our 5 values. Our first is faith. Our Christian faith drives it's our filter for all of our decision-making process. Our family is a value that I've mentioned earlier. Integrity is an important value to John and myself. Generosity is our 4th value, and gratitude is the 5th. And those 5 values are what we have focused in on. Now, I would say to any listener, you're thinking, oh my goodness, I've never done that. Well, wherever you are, there's a great leadership principle. Start where you are, use what you can, do what you can with what you have. And so start now and begin to think, what matters to us going forward? What matters to me? What matters to us as a couple? And then as you go forward, you begin to focus your energies on those key values for yourself and even your children, grandchildren, people around you may begin to notice, boy, this person's really gotten focused on how they're living their life. And so it's important. So never too late to do that. I think the earlier you can determine that, probably the more effective you can be in your planning going forward. But if you're later in life, it's not too late to make adjustments. And I always say one of the parenting opportunities that we have is to say, you know what, kids, I didn't get this right back then, but here going forward, here's a change that you're probably going to see in me. And I think that's perfectly great as a parent to be able to say that.
You know, Trudy, as we come to the close of our time together, there's so much wisdom that you've imparted to all of us listening here today. And I know that there are a million questions I should have asked or Steve should have asked, but we didn't. Can you think of any one question that you wish we would have asked you here today? And what would you have, how would you have answered that for our listeners?
Oh, I think we've covered some good ground. I appreciate the wonderful questions that you've given me. Not really a question, but maybe just a verse from Ephesians that would be a challenging verse to leave us all with. Paul says to be careful in how you live. He said, don't live as the foolish, but live as being wise. And the next statement is the most important one he says, make the most of every opportunity during these evil days. That's a challenge to me. It should be a challenge to all of us that we're to make the most of every opportunity we've been given. When my mom was sick in the hospital, she kind of put it this way. She said, days are long, but life is short.
Amen. What a great verse to end on and a great word of encouragement. We really appreciate you spending time with us today. How can our listeners go about finding you online, Trudy?
Yes, you can find me at trudycathywhite.com. If you're specifically looking for the book, of course, you can go to alegacythatlastbook.com. Amazon, you can pick up any of my books, and I hope that they are a tremendous blessing to everyone who picks up one to read.
Our guest today has been Trudy Cathy White. What a blessing and what an amazing amount of wisdom that Trudy has imparted to us here today. The book that we've been speaking about is A Legacy That Lasts, and would really strongly encourage you to pick a copy of that up. Trudy, we really thank you for your time. We know that you're a busy person. Thank you for spending time with us today on the StrongTeams.com podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. What an honor.
Well, until we meet again, God bless.